There's another train, there always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard another train. You feel your tongue, there's no such thing. Though you're standing on your own breath is king. The beginning is now, don't turn around. Regrets of bad mistakes will only drain you. There's another train, there always is. Maybe the next one is yours. Get up and climb aboard another train.
I looked at the whole thing. I'm an engineer by profession. I'm a mining engineer. I'm not a rail engineer, but you know, I can add up as well as the next bloke can, possibly better than some. And I came up with a figure of around about $90 million, plus or minus perhaps 10 to 15%, and that's pretty standard in engineering terms. So what do we get for our $90 million? And I'll just go quickly through it. First of all, the easiest route here to reopen passenger services between Ballarat and Geelong, and two major cities with universities and hospitals and all that kind of thing. The fact that you've got to get on this hell bus, it takes an hour and a half to go between the two towns by public transport, is outrageous. And I know people who do it, but they'd rather catch the train into Melbourne and then the one out to Geelong rather than go on the hell bus. There's about half a dozen level crossings that need to be upgraded. There's some platform work, and what we've said on most of the stations is, because they're in private hands, or they're like Carisbrook, so dilapidated, that it's probably easier to rebuild another platform, you know, in this case, out there somewhere, like they did at Talbot. But I'll get to Newstead specifically. So we're up for a couple of stations, reopening Bannockburn and Meredith, if you know the area. And that's about all that's required, some yard work in North Geelong yards. Under $10 million to redo that. Which in terms of today's dollars, I'm afraid, $10 million when I was a kid, you could have nearly bought all of Australia, but you don't get much for $10 million. $100 million was spent on one station in Melbourne. Sorry, two stations in Melbourne, two new stations, and they were $100 million each. So we're saying for less than the cost of one station in Melbourne, you can get this whole project up and running. So as I say, the Geelong Ballarat section is almost a no-brainer, and governments will have their asses kicked for not reinstituting the passenger service years ago, or even pulling it out in the first place. So for around about 90 million, or probably less by the time everybody gets a suck of the sausage, the design engineers and whatever, you can probably squeeze it up to 90. For not a lot of money, you can get this train in. V-Line's problem at the moment, and I'm very sympathetic to them, is that governments, of course, starved public transport for the last 50, 60, 70 years of money. And they are literally short of rolling stock. The current government has bought another 41 DMUs, the velocity trains, and when they come on stream, that starts to be late this year, there will be some sprinters that will be released, and sprinters, which are 115 kilometre an hour passenger vehicles, would be ideally suited to this line. So V-Line can't say we won't have the spare capacity coming up, because there'll be, I think they own about 18 sprinters, and a couple of them would be available here. The plan, and it's not my plan, this is V-Line's plan in the report, talked about 4 trains a day either way, which would effectively, for places like Carisbrook, Newstead, Maryborough, mean that you can get to Melbourne or Bendigo or Geelong and Ballarat and home again of an evening, for commuters, for people with medical appointments, for social activities. So 4 trains a day either way, no complications. We've got a question over here.
Yeah, look, those of us have read the report from the engineers who wrote the original 900 million. Perhaps you could just explain to us how they got to that extraordinary figure of 900 million?
Yep.
Just briefly, as briefly as you can.
Yeah. Briefly, this line was said to be upgraded to 160 kilometres an hour. This is the major reason, which meant the old curvy line had to be straightened out, which was quite a lot of property acquisitions.
So realignment.
Realignment. That's the major issue.
And in your report, sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, and the other one was is that they were going to spend 250 million on the line between Bendigo and Castlemaine.
Exactly, and that's really important here, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, do we really need to be having a dedicated track from Geelong to Bendigo when we can easily just get off at Castlemaine, change trains? There are plenty of trains to Bendigo from Castlemaine.
And you may be going to Melbourne anyway, so you may be changing trains in any case.
Exactly.
So that's there's a couple of very big gaping holes.
And just one other small thing, how many people are we talking about on the corridor from Geelong, Ballarat, Castlemaine, Maryborough, Bendigo? Like roughly how
in
many
rough
people?
terms, half a million.
Half a million people. So that's quite extraordinary. That's we're talking about a major trunk rail in Melbourne.
That's right.
I would like to now introduce you to Professor Bill Russell. Bill is the president of Rail Futures Incorporated, formerly from the Australian Centre for Governance and Management of Urban Transport at Melbourne University, and we welcome you to Newstead, Bill.
Thanks, Scott. And I'd like to begin by congratulating the Alliance on organising this protest and on the way this community has come together. Look at this beautiful station that we're standing under this morning. It's not vandalised, it's decayed, but it's not vandalised. The vandalisation has occurred from Spring Street when they've destroyed this train service that your community and the other communities along the line have had in the past and deserve to have now. This line is very important. It's part of a network, and the network it forms part of, the rail network in Victoria, the regional rail network, has been growing through the roof in the last 10 years. And why has it been growing through the roof? It's because we've got over the idea, last century idea of car dependence. We've realised that if we have proper trains, proper investment in the railway system, it provides enormous access and mobility to communities. Just think of the things that you use the railway system for. You use it for jobs, access to jobs. You use it for access to leisure. You use it for access to shopping. You use it for access to sport, to get to the footy or something like that. You use it to visit friends and relatives. You use it for medical appointments, and you use it for tourism. All of those things bring people through your community and allow people in the community to access perhaps, say, the new cancer centre in Ballarat, or a footy game that might be held in Melbourne or in Bendigo. Now this station has its 140th birthday in 3 months and 1 day from now. It was opened in 1874, and I had a look at the timetable when this was in its heyday. And when it was in its heyday, there were 4 trains a day in each direction, and they connected through, one lot of them connected through to Melbourne via Ballarat, and the other lot connected through to Melbourne and Bendigo via Castlemaine. So think of the flexibility that provides for people in this town to get to those schools, to get to those doctors, to get to those shops, and to get to those jobs. It's a fantastic improvement in the capacity of people living here to get to all those things. But as Noel has said, it also is the reverse. It allows tourists and visitors and relatives to come to this town and all the other towns along the line. As Noel said, the price of doing this is by no means outrageous by modern standards. He mentioned the price of some of these new stations. Well, the Williams Landing station that he mentioned, it actually cost $123 million. One station, $123 million, if it's in the suburbs. And that's the sort of figure that would really get this project moving a long way down the track, and it is something that the government has promised. Now, we're really proud, usually in Victoria, of our social capital. We usually have the best schools and hospitals and roads, but over 30 or 40 years, our railway system in regional areas, the social capital there was dissipated by governments of both political persuasions. What we have now, through your alliance and through this report and through the government's own policies, is the opportunity to put back in place a really important part of our railway network. The investments in the velocity trains and so on have resulted in V-Line being the fastest growing passenger railway in Australia. Since the velocity trains were introduced, the usage of the country train system in Victoria has doubled from 7 million to 15 million passengers a year. These investments really work. I spend a lot of time in Ararat. Kenneth closed down the train to Ararat and it was reopened in 2004. The sceptics said it wouldn't work. But the morning train from Ararat has 440 seats and the average loading on that is 240 people, the equivalent capacity of 10 buses. Now Ararat is a smaller place than Maryborough is, so the same potential exists in this location. Ararat has got its train back, Echuca has got its train back, Maryborough has got its train back, and there are communities right across Victoria that say, we want part of this regional rail revival. Hamilton wants it, Portland wants it, Horsham wants it, Donald wants it, Mildura wants it, and you people want it.
Guildford wants it.
Newstead wants it, Guildford wants it. And this is the chance, if you get behind the alliance, and really say to the candidates as we have an election year, that this is something that's going to be a make or break for whoever wants to be your representative in this part of Victoria.
These Melbourne-centric politicians have just announced a $2.5 billion extension and fix-up for the Pakenham and Craigieburn lines. $2.5 billion, and we have a rail line which we could do for $90 million. Also, the Nathan government gave $300 million of corporate welfare to Lindsay Fox to keep his airport open at Avalon Airport. $300 million. $300 million. What would that $300 million do? We most probably could easily put a rail line and a passenger service back into Mildura. And that's what the Australian or the Victorian electorate needs to be incensed about. That failure to meet the expectations of country people and our ambitions and our desires for our own community, rather than being fed what we're being fed from Spring Street, which is an abysmal house, having been there.
I've seen Castlemaine mushroom because of the effect of putting on the fast train, the commuter train between Bendigo and Melbourne. It wasn't a case of making it fast, it was a case of making it earlier. It's all about scheduling. So that has changed the demographic in Castlemaine. There must be families rolling in all the time. We know the story. Northcote moves to Castlemaine. Why are they moving? Because they can commute into Castlemaine in the same time as they can from many suburbs around Melbourne, and they can have a better lifestyle. Their kids can go to good rural primary schools, and they've got the promise of a new secondary school coming up, or new buildings, and they can enjoy the lifestyle. Imagine what would have to happen to Newstead if you could commute from here to Maryborough, from here to Ballarat, from here to Bendigo, on the train, get the train back in the evening. You'd have people coming here to live just for that. You'd have people here with limited options, young people who currently have to leave if they want to get a decent job, most of them. They could be living here and commuting. That for me is dream enough. The rail for me is the way of the future. We're not going to have unlimited fuel for our cars. We know that now. We know that it's a finite Earth. Believe it or not, the Earth does not stretch out for an infinite distance in all directions. It's actually round. Our politicians haven't quite got up with this, and it's only a certain size. And sooner or later, what we're taking out of it's going to run out. And that includes our fuel. And the most efficient way of using the fuel that's left is for us all to use the railway. And that's what the legacy we have to leave. So without any expert knowledge, I won't talk anymore, except I just want to encourage you to keep supporting Noel and the group, because you might be small in numbers compared to the vast millions in Melbourne protesting about various things, but if you keep on saying the same message, eventually it will work, because it's got heart in it and it's a good solution. So I just encourage you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come along, my friends, come along. Get aboard and ride this train. Nothing on this train to lose, everything to gain. Come along, my friends, come along. Get aboard and ride this train. Nothing on